everyone, it's Angela Stevens with the podcast Refocus with Angela. I'm so excited about this episode. You're going to be delighted when you hear about what we talk about because everyone is curious about it. But before I go into that, I want to introduce you to our guest today. Her name is Stefanie Solomon. She is a physician assistant and she's been practicing for over 10 years and she is with Onimo Sano Psychiatry. She diagnoses and treats individuals with ADHD. She works with a lot of the mental health areas, and we're going to talk a lot about those areas. But first of all, thank you so much, Stefanie, for joining us today. I graciously appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this talk. I think it's going to be great.
Wonderful. So, we were talking before the show, and one thing that I've read a lot about is empathy, and I don't think a lot of people understand how important empathy is, especially not only in adults, but also in our children as we raise them. And so I think there's sympathy, right? And there's empathy. So would you mind, first off, to just kind of clarify that for our listeners, because I think that will help them understand the differences.
Sure. So empathy is basically the ability to understand another person's perspective and like in their reality. And also, identifying what other people are feeling as far as their emotions and, what they're going through. And it takes more of like an insight versus sympathy is more showing support like on a superficial level or a surface level, more with just words. So more of like an acknowledgement versus like an understanding. So with sympathy, you may try and show support and say things like, if someone is distressed, you may want to say things like, I'm sorry for your loss, which is, a nice, is nice, but it's kind of, superficial. It doesn't really help them feel supported. And you're kind of you think you're understanding them, but it's more from your own perspective versus from their perspective. Empathy, on the other hand, is more, identifying with the other person's perspective and feelings, even if you don't necessarily agree or, with the situation, but you feel what they're feeling. And it's more of like a deeper connection. And it takes practice. It's something that, is a skill that over time, takes practice and kind of introspection so that, it's more of an active thing that you would do. So, and it versus sympathy, where it's like more on the surface level, the empathy, can strengthen relationships, builds more trust, and helps people to feel more heard and understood and less judged. So it's empathy can be really powerful and just really help people feel more supported and less alone. When you sympathize with someone, you may recognize their feelings and show kindness, but you don't necessarily experience their emotions yourself. It's more of one way street versus a two-way street.
Right. And do you think, I have a question about that. Does tone, like the tone of your voice, can that make the difference as well sometimes?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, because you may say the words, but if your tone or your body language doesn't reflect what you're saying, then people, other people can sense that and they may feel closed off and less, comfortable with, sharing more or, but with the empathy, using that specific tone, actively listening, to them and paying attention, they might feel more comfortable and heard.
So I've got a question about, so I want to do a little bit of an example for our listeners. So for instance, if you were to see somebody and say that they had lost somebody, if you said, I'm so sorry for your loss, that sounds like a certain way, right? But if you say, I'm so sorry about your loss, I didn't know, or something like that, it's a different feel. Did that come across like you would think that the difference would be?
Well, sort of. I think, the first one that you said, the
Yeah.
former, where it's not as, you know, caring sounding, is
Yeah.
more like a pity kind of thing, or maybe slightly sympathetic. And so saying, I'm so sorry for your loss, yes, that's sympathy, and it's more kind, comes off as more kind, but saying things like, actually trying to feel what they're feeling. So you might want to say like, I can't imagine what you are going through, or, saying that must be so hard for you. I understand how you feel. You're right to be upset, things like that.
That is
So
really, I mean, you hit it on the head right there. That was perfect because I was trying to think of, how someone would say that. And I think if anyone was listening, they should write those words down that you just said, because even the words that you said came across just
yeah.
really like I felt that. So, I mean, that is great. What about, I want to talk a little bit about, our children, they know in today's world, if a family has, if a child has lost a parent or something, sometimes kids cannot be so kind, right? So as parents, what
Mhm.
can we teach them to say if there's an example or something? And I know this is a really hard topic because as I was telling you before, we're really specific and particular about who we ask this question to, because it's so important to me and to our company about how to help people. And so, do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah. So it kind of depends on the age of the kids, because a lot of children, especially young children, don't fully understand emotions
Mhm.
yet. They might understand some of the basic, happy, sad, angry, but some of, the more deeper or more nuanced emotions, like feeling frustrated or disappointed, they might not understand. So I think helping our kids, identify other emotions or emotions in general, and, in themselves and in others, is like, would be the first step. So that way they can be more aware of it and start to kind of practice,
Yeah.
recognizing those in others.
Yeah.
And once, they do recognize that, then they start to, you know, they can start to think about, how would I feel if I was this person,
Yeah.
so, and that, makes it a lot easier for them to understand and to be empathetic. So if they, think like, this was my parent, how would I, honestly, how would I feel? Then it's just a deeper, understanding and connection. And so, they can offer up more of like a supportive, like, I'm with you, not like, not just I understand or I acknowledge, but, I'm with you. I'm standing with you through this. And, they could say, I'm so sorry, but they don't even have to say sorry. They could just say, I can't imagine that, how hard this must be for you. If there's anything I can do to help you, or, I'm here for you, things like that, just
Stephanie,
letting
I
the
think
person.
you, I think you're the best friend anybody could have as a child, because you know exactly what to say at those times. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just thinking, if I had a best friend in elementary, I think it would have been you, because kids cannot be so kind, right? And one thing, parents, right, it's better to talk to them than to be silent, right, when they get home.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, like, there's, teaching our kids about nonverbal cues versus, the verbal or the language. So sometimes, others might say one thing, but then their nonverbal, body language might say another. And so I think part of the empathy, is recognizing those nonverbal, actions in others, and then addressing that. Like, so if someone might feel closed off, like they are afraid to, they don't want to share anything, or, but they're upset, or they have like their tears in their eyes, then, you could say, hey, like, are you okay? What's going on? Tell me, talk to me about it. So opening up the conversation for them. So whether it's with our kids or with other people, at work or whatnot,
Yeah.
just being observant to the other person's feelings, and then kind of getting perspective on it. And that'll really help, that opening up the conversation for
Yeah.
them.
And again, I think that is so important, because, I wanted to ask you, you work in a with mental health. And we'll go back to empathy in a minute, but I wanted to ask you a question. What are people, kids, all alike? What are they struggling with now?
Kids, right now, I think a lot of kids are struggling with, feeling pressure to perform like their peers. And, with social media, I think it's a lot different than it was, many years, 30 years ago, even 30, 40 years ago. Because, with TikTok and all these other things, they just see like all these other people maybe doing things that they don't think that they can do. And I think it's probably hurts, self-esteem, and especially with, ADHD becoming more frequently diagnosed and more prevalent, that can affect self-esteem. And, when children are undiagnosed with whether it's ADHD or something else, they just might feel like it might induce, some sadness and anxiety and things like that. So being there for, our kids and people in general just will help them feel more comfortable to share like how they're feeling versus keeping it to themselves and struggling, on their
Yeah.
own.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I know that you diagnose ADHD a lot too, and I've got two questions around that. First of all, with ADHD, for parents, when is the time that they should, consider getting their child tested? Like, what are some of the signs or the symptoms to notice? Because sometimes, as you know, a lot of kids are being diagnosed very, very early, and sometimes too early, right?
Mhm.
So what are things that, we just need to keep an eye out for?
I would say as if the child is, seems to be making an effort, but is still struggling with things, or, they're past like the really young toddler age or into their school years, and that they're intelligent or that they can do it, but for whatever reason they're struggling to do it, um, or having behavioral problems that don't necessarily, consistently, like in consistent settings, like school and at home, or and you've tried to help them with it and they just can't verbalize or they can't express why they're having those issues, might be a reason to get evaluated. But um, it's tough at that age, and because it manifests differently in everybody. And so while one child might have, that typical like hyperactive, all over the room, getting up out of their seat presentation, another child might have more of like a quiet, quieter, like introverted, but maybe more trouble with focusing and doing homework. And so it's harder to kind of pinpoint when it can vary so differently. So I
Right.
guess just, supporting them as much as you can, and then, just letting them know that you're there if they need
Mhm.
to talk about things that they're feeling like they're struggling with.
It's interesting because that's with our company, Refocus the Creative Office. All of our products are created through the eyes of a child with ADHD. And that was my turning point when,
Mhm.
I was getting phone calls and emails and just on a daily basis from the teachers. And I was kind of this is years ago, right? When ADHD was not, I mean, it was like if you gave medication, they were going to be, walking sideways or something. And so it was very controversial back then. My son's 22 now, but I realized he was really struggling. He was making an effort and he was struggling, and I saw it. And then I just started looking through his eyes every day. And so I would say not to, overdo that, but just to kind of keep an eye out and then make, systems that work for them. Do you have any advice, first of all, around that, on things they can do in the morning to make things go better? You have any advice for parents out there?
To make it help with the child.
Yeah, to make like the day go smoother. And I know there's a lot of things that we can say. I just didn't know, if you had advised like your patients, any ideas on that.
Yeah, well, most of my patients, I see adults 18 and over, so who have ADHD, but also some of them have children who have ADHD. So
Yeah.
I think it's as far as things that they can do, eating like a well-balanced diet can definitely affect it. Getting good amount of sleep, going to bed at a decent hour, and minimizing like technology before bed and stuff, so that they do get a good night's sleep. And then just drinking a lot of water, and trying to stay patient with each other. So, there can be a lot of, yelling and frustration, especially like in the mornings and trying to get out of the house. And so, setting alarms, and blocking off schedules for, just making things very specific, so that you have to follow that. And I think things will go more smoothly, with that.
You're spot on, because they model our behavior, right? I mean, a lot of kids will model our behavior. So if we're yelling, they're going to yell, or whatever. So it's interesting when, I know you've got kids, but you also specialize working with adults too. And I find that fascinating because I was diagnosed at age 45, and I thought I was getting early onset dementia. I've been very public about that because I was frightened. And I had menopause at the time with those issues, which made it even more complicated. But, I had ADHD my whole life. It makes total sense now. It's the reason I have 3 businesses. I can get and go like this all day long and never get tired. My poor husband has a son and a wife with ADHD. So it can be a little crazy. But when talk to us a little bit about adults really fast on that, being diagnosed with ADHD. If you're an adult, what I find is a lot of women, especially now, are realizing, they're struggling, where we were just kind of going in circles before. But as an adult, we know what to look for, but when is it that we think, hey, I might need to be tested for this? Are there any signs like maybe at work or at home?
As an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I've, as far as what I tell my patients and what I've noticed just kind of as a trend is starting to, once you develop more responsibilities, college, and then afterwards, you get into the workforce, and if you have kids, it just kind of, everything kind of compounds together. And, so while one of those stressors, like college on its own, can be stressful and overwhelming, a lot of people, they think that however they're feeling is normal, and they just kind of manage through it. But then once you get into kind of later on, and you have more responsibilities and things just seem impossible, that's when you kind of realize, like, I need help. I mean, that's how it went for me. I was diagnosed about 4 years ago. So I was in my mid-30s, and I had just had my second child, working full time. And, just getting ready in the morning, getting them out the door was just like insanely, overwhelming. It was a monumental thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought to myself, this is not, it can't be this, it shouldn't be this hard, this is not normal. So that's, was a sign to me to go get evaluated. But, and my focus was affected and everything. Whereas in the past, it was manageable. I just maybe had to work a little bit harder to, to study
Right.
for exams and things like that. But I feel like, it gets to a point where you're using all the tools, that you've developed, over your life. And what I've noticed in my, a lot of my patients who are, older, in their 40s, 50s, whatever, 50, that have made it, they have had success, they have master's degrees and PhDs and stuff, but they get to a point where all these tools that they've developed, to manage up until this point just isn't enough. And so, and I get the, feeling like you have like a dementia of some sort, because, the memory loss
Oh yeah.
just feels abnormal. And so I think, and now that we're learning more and more about ADHD, especially like in women and girls, I think people, people will start to be getting diagnosed earlier and getting help earlier. But so up until now, there's been a lot of unknown about it. And so I think it will be helpful for the next generation. But yeah, I would say anyone that feels like, life is just, they're trying their best, and they're doing everything they can, and they're still struggling, then it could be an undiagnosed ADHD and be worth
Mm-hmm.
checking out. So,
And it's interesting because when people hear, like, I love the mental health field. I'm passionate about what we do here, and just about ADHD and just the whole area of trying to help people focus better. But if somebody, when you hear the word psychiatry, right, it kind of, you think, okay, I don't know, what, how do people come to that point? I mean, because, and I always say the difference, right? And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Psychiatrists, they can prescribe medication, where psychologists do not. And a lot of people they still don't understand sometimes the differences. But what would you say to somebody right now that maybe needs to probably get help for their self and for their family? How would they take that step to go to a psychiatrist?
Well, they can, if they have a primary care doctor, they can talk to them about it and get a referral, or see if it's something that they feel that they should get checked out. But I feel like the stigma around like psychiatry is what deters people a lot. And they feel like once they take that step, like something's wrong with them, or, and that's not it. It's a matter of, do you want your life to improve? How much are you struggling, and how much distress are you in, and what do you want to do about it? So whether it be a psychologist or a therapist to start with, or a psychiatrist to get an evaluation, either one, because sometimes, you may not need medication. So a lot of my patients do, are referred to us by their therapist who they've been seeing for a while. And, they say, my therapist said that, we've been working on things, but it's not improving just with therapy. So medication might be the next step. But even if they're not sure whether to see a psychologist or psychiatrist, they could see a psychiatrist, and we can, do an evaluation and then determine the next best step, whether it be therapy or medication. So I think getting past that stigma and realizing that mental health, mental illness is way more prevalent than people realize or talk about is, a big part of it. So
it is. And I really appreciate you saying that, because I think there's a lot of people that, just going and getting over the stigma of going, it will make your life better. And it will make your family's life better too, just talking. And you may not need medication. You may need to see a therapist or something, but it's all good, because it's all going to help improve your life. And I think that's the best thing that you said. In the last few minutes, is that it will improve your life. And that really caught me. It's interesting. I found, there's always something that goes along with ADHD usually. Right. So whether it might be anxiety or depression, and sometimes not. For me, it was always anxiety. And I think my son a little bit the same. But we talked a little bit about empathy earlier in the show. With ADHD and empathy, what I found was having my son learn empathy with ADHD. Adults and children may be totally different. I'm not sure. That's what I'd love to know from you. But, is it harder for kids with ADHD to learn empathy? Is it harder for adults with ADHD to learn empathy?
Yeah, I think it is. Whether it's kids and adults, I think it's probably maybe hard for kids in the sense that because of the fact that they may not understand, all the emotions that can occur, but also they themselves are more prone to having strong emotions, and more, sensitivity, which on one hand can be helpful because they tend to, have more compassion and, understanding, like as far as wanting to help others. But because of their own, intense emotions and intense, you know, um, their intense feelings, it might be hard for them to put themselves in other people's shoes, right? Or to see other perspective. And then there's also, a lot of people with ADHD might come off to others as like indifferent or apathetic, not because they don't care, but because, the attention issue, obviously with ADHD, and the just impulse control, and the fact that, they may interrupt people, they may cut people off. And, part of being empathetic is listening and active listening, and mindfulness. And that's something that's very hard for children and adults with ADHD to practice. So while they may have a tendency to be more compassionate, it, might come across as the opposite, or, unempathetic. So just kind of working on that mindfulness and
yeah, it's so true. When you said all of that, it was just coming back to me with my son. It just, interrupting and blurting out things, and not at the most, not at the best time, or even driving. If I wanted to turn somewhere else, and he was just like, "No, you need to turn right," and he would be, it's an intense. When you said intensity, I connect with you on so many levels. So I appreciate that. But well, first of all, I could talk to you all day long. I mean, I like I said, I think, you have so much to offer, and we've learned so much today, and I really appreciate your time. But I have one last question for you, because I'm sure every day you're not perfectly focused like the rest of us, and you may be, but but when you have those days when you're not, let's say it's just you're not focused, everything's kind of, you're being pulled left and right, and you're trying to really get focused, but you get in your car, what is the music or the song or the genre of the artist that you listen to that gets you game on?
Yeah. I would say I'm a big fan of Dave Matthews Band. So for some reason, this one song always, whenever I'm going to something that like I'm feeling nervous or anxious about, or not, I need to like boost my confidence. I kind of feel like it's like my good luck charm song. It's called "So Damn Lucky," and it's just
Awesome.
a beautiful, like it's a great song, and the words are really, motivating, and it's just a really, it's a good song, and I just feel like good after I hear it, and just feel better about whatever I'm about to.
What a great song. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was wonderful. Well, perfect. Well, thank you again so much for joining us today. We graciously appreciate your time. We've learned so much today, and we'll have you back on. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.